It's only a question of time, because
I have a copy, it's in my apartment.
Right. Our scheduling for the starting.
Search on my books.
Who is a professor at Haverford, is the contact guy.
Oh, okay.
And I signed up for this. I was like, oh, this is the guy that bought the thing. Like, he's really psyched.
Yeah, I figured. What's your name?
My name is Ina.
Isn't this
We'll see.
Unless I
Yeah, negotiation dates is just, it's one of those things. It's just probably I'm mostly.
I've heard of them, but I couldn't say anything about it.
Are you first up tomorrow?
Yes, after worship, I believe. Maybe there's something in between, I'm not sure.
Right after, I think it's directly after worship.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything.
Was that
Well,
with the live stream?
and then apprenticeship almost, right?
Yeah, they're not live streaming the morning.
Oh.
I think John wants me to open with a song, George.
You want to do what?
Open with a song.
Nice.
And I was going to do When I Rise, because it's a good one to get us moving this after dinner. Great. Sounds good.
We've been singing a lot on the walk.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yes, and it's such a comfort.
Oh, that's good.
And sometimes it needs to be not a comfort, but an inspiration, you know what I mean?
Oh, yes, I do know.
Get up and walk.
Well, Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, who was here, gave an opening plenary, said, he's the co-chair of the clergy caucus for power. And he was saying that Rabbi Julie Weinberg has been going to all the clergy members and saying, all right, the walk starts on the 8th and it ends on the 22nd. Which one are you coming to? He's like, well, this one really works for me. She's like, nope, pick one.
Oh, Rabbi Julie. Can anyone say no to her?
She's pretty excellent.
Oh, you know she was Trico, right?
No.
Yeah. I first met her when she was a Swarthmore student.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She was what? A Swarthmore student.
Oh,
I did not know that.
Julie and her best friend spent the time in the library crossing out he when it meant they or people.
Yes.
My Russian
Well, it reminds me of, have you read Ursula K. Le Guin, the science fiction writer, has an essay about how I'm not a very good he. And it's all about how he was used as the general they. And it's a really funny essay. It's quite hilarious because it's all about, plays on words and twisting it around. It's really fun.
Thanks for telling me that.
I'll be back in a
Back in the 80s, there was a wonderful handbook for non-sexist writing done by Swift Miller and Swift, two women who taught specifically about using there as the third person singular as the answer. And I try like anything to get my academic friends. One of them has finally come around, maybe, and sometimes. It's hard if it was true. It's so hard. I don't get it.
It's easy to pick it up when
We say it all the time.
Yeah.
Why don't we write it that way? It's so silly. I think for the next 10 years, it will always be she, and women should be in charge of everything.
Only 10.
I have to say, it always strikes me, Amanda and her examples. She did this and she did that. I was like, oh, that's right. We always read so often in her examples. Switch to.
It's delicious.
I picked up and somebody, that people were praying and they said amen, and I said, automatically.
Okay.
We're gonna have better chicken things back home in this month.
It's like the hurdle.
See, we used to sing yay and
I like it. Making it as possible for you. Yeah.
I've heard it means I agree.
Yeah.
I've heard that it means I agree, but I don't know where I heard that from or if that's actually true.
Maybe so. It says so be it. So be it. But it doesn't say where it comes from, which drives me crazy. You love it. Found in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament.
I don't really know what that means. Zela.
All right, I need a different perspective this evening.
Yeah, I know.
So
It's
anyone
called
is
switch
a
out on
word
the
that
chair.
came to English from Latin, which got it from
We
Greek,
still have about 5 minutes.
which got it from Aramaic, which got it from Hebrew. Technically, Aramaic may have used it anyway before it came.
Amen.
Well, these are the Catholics. Difficult to translate the word directly, which is often the reason that words are from other languages. Well, it reminds me of shalom, right? It's not easily translatable.
Oh, it doesn't mean peace.
It's more than that.
Okay.
It's
Wholeness.
and salam, I think similarly. My mother always used to use the example of the French sympathy. She grew up with French. She said it's not sympathetic, although it looks like that. And the Italians say simpatico, well, that's not like either kind. So there's always a little
I was watching some women comedian the other day, and they were just going, they were acting like they were in Congress, and they were talking about, just shifting everything around. They were talking about the men not getting their Viagra, and
I love it. There's a woman in Texas. There's a woman in Texas who wants to make it illegal for the That's right. They make sure they get permission from their wives.
And they're going,
We ought to also, reminds me of Melissa Strata, you know.
all of this, maybe help some people see, but it was just so clear and so that, you know, this whole thing about how men want to get all into it, whether or not you can have an abortion, whether or not you should have an ultrasound, but we want to get all into this stuff. It was just hilarious.
Well, they're trying to be within they'll be however, there's too many things.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I'm here. Just get me, under somebody's claiming that giant pillow over there. I think you can claim it. It looks like a nice giant one. A tree. And it's big enough that it won't fall through. Oh, it's so big, my living room wants to see. Oh, that works.
Yeah, I'm gonna check this.
I don't have to keep pulling it out if it falls through. Yeah, I didn't really notice the pillows. Yeah, there is a lot of respect for the Quaker tradition, but I think they have some different heating abilities that I don't have.
I've got news for West Palm Beach. When they built a new meeting house. They got,
Good evening, friends. Welcome back.
and then they went and bought Windsor chairs.
And you don't need to start filming yet there. Just as a break. Unless we want our dear friend Lena is going to lead us in an after dinner song to enliven us before George's. If you are able.
It's a very simple song that also has some motions that I know for me, after eating, I have to keep moving, otherwise I sort of sink deeper and deeper into the bench. And so that's livened up for George a little bit. The motions are very simple and the words are very simple and it's quite repetitive. So I invite folks to listen, and if you know it, start it from the start, and if you don't know it, pick it up as you pick it up. And I learned this from Training for Change, I think, or Daniel Hunter. Yeah. But you kind of start with this. And when I rise, I will rise up.
I will rise up
Like a bird,
like a bird,
powerfully, and when I fall, I will fall down,
I will fall down
like a leaf, gracefully,
gracefully.
and when I rise,
When I rise,
I will rise up.
I will rise up
Like a bird,
like a bird,
powerfully,
powerfully.
and when I fall,
When I fall,
I will fall down,
I will fall down
like a leaf,
like a leaf,
gracefully.
gracefully.
No movement without movement.
Right. Oh my. Fortunately, you all have even the abbreviated biography of George Lakey in your program. But we are very pleased to have with us this evening George Lakey. And so when I say we were gathering lifelong activists from those in their 20s to those, I think I said in the late 70s, but I think you're going to turn 80 on this walk. Is that right?
No, in November.
In November. Okay, we have a while. But so George is taking time away from the Walk for Jobs, Power Local Green Jobs, that is an Equate action that is walking through the Philadelphia area suburbs served by PECO in an attempt to get PECO to buy energy locally from local purveyors of solar and other forms of renewable energy, predominantly solar, and creating green jobs in the city at the same time. And so this walk is how many? 100 miles. Yes. And a little bit more than 100 miles. So George has been walking. We picked him up from Valley Forge this afternoon. So he's had a little bit of a nap on the floor in the reading room and is revived to bring us a message of hope. We're calling it, "Now's the time. Seize the day. Here's how." Doesn't that sound like the organizer's manual you want to pick up that says, "We are the people. Now is the time. Let's do it." So George has been a lifelong activist. He's also a scholar of nonviolent direct action. Has taught for many years at the university level, most recently at Swarthmore as the Lang professor, and is the founder of organizations that we all hold in high esteem. The Movement for a New Society, for those of you who are old enough to remember that milestone in the movement. Training for Change, which many of us have graduated from and are happy to see going very strong. And most recently, the Earthquaker Action Team, on which he is serving and on which board Lena is serving, and are doing marvelous work locally as in the Rebel group, the Rebel Action Group. I want to mention that George is also an author. I wanted to give the title of his other book, which I always have to look at because otherwise I might forget it, and that's Grassroots and Nonprofit Leadership, a guide for organizations in changing times, which is now back in print. His most recent book, is it still in third printing, or have you gone to the fourth by now?
Third printing, getting ready for the paperback.
Paperback is on its way. Viking Economics, how the Scandinavians got it right and how we can too. If you ever thought that economics was a dry subject, this is the book for you, because it is not the dismal science. It is actually the hopeful word that in times of extraordinary polarization and resistance by organized mass movements, grassroots movements in the Scandinavian countries, the elite oligarchy was turned out, and true democracy, or a truer form of democracy in those countries, was achieved. Not in the balmy times, but in the times of trouble. And I think you're going to hear more about that tonight. So the message of hope tonight is, now is the time. Seize the day. Here's how. Let's give a rousing welcome to George Lakey.
Pleasure to be here, even though my body is weary, my spirit is very happy to be with you. Very happy to be with you. I'd like to, in the beginning, talk more about polarization, because that's your context, and to fill in some blanks about what this polarization is about, because it's not accidental. And then to talk very much about, as John said, what to do about it, and how we can move with it and through it, and get to the other side, to where we want to be.
Or do you want to lift your microphone maybe just a smidge?
Sure. Does this help? Does this help you hear better? No, it doesn't. It's not turned on. Oh, well, there's a...
That's the one technology thing I know how to do.
And this is kind of a lesson to us all, isn't it? If we're not turned on, then we're probably not going to turn on others. I think there are many layers to that. Moving briskly further. Well, at least I got Lena on this. Right. Well, it's very easy in the ugliness of many of the manifestations of polarization, and also in noticing that we have a tweeting president who's contributing everything he can to polarization. It's easy for us to think, oh, this is a recent phenomenon. This is kind of happening now. But the reality is that this polarization has been building for decades. And there are a couple of political scientists who made it their business to try to figure out, where does it come from? What does it correlate with? And political scientists are like a lot of social scientists. We love to find out what the correlations are. So they tried this and they tried that and they tried the other thing, running curves of other possible things it might correlate with. And they found that the curve associated with polarization that was truest, that was closest, was the curve of economic inequality. The more inequality, the more polarized societies get, and that's very, very much the case for us. Well, right away, an implication, right? Do you see anything in any policy set up that's going to reduce inequality in the next few years? No, the reverse, right? Right. So everything's set for ever increasing inequality for the next period. And so, what can we expect about polarization?
Bigger.
How about that? Bigger and bigger and bigger. So, for those of us who find it ugly, we have a wonderful spiritual growth opportunity. Right? Which is how not to be overwhelmed by the sheer ugliness and viciousness that we've only seen a piece of so far. We'll see way more and worse. And so how do we retain our equanimity? How do we stay centered in the light of that? And it's really important that we stay centered in the light of that, right? What nobody who watches you, and we all have people watching us, right? We're reference people for a lot of other folks. Oh, how's he handling this, you know? And the more we're in that kind of condition, the less useful we will be. So we both owe it to ourselves to find our center and stay centered no matter how crazy things get. But also we owe it to others because there's a kind of contagion of panic that can happen. You probably remember a contagion after the election and before the inauguration, before the Women's March, right? When people were running around scaring each other like crazy. In fact, almost everywhere I went, what the main conversation was scaring each other. So, and even one-upping, you know. Did you hear the latest? Oh, no, I didn't hear that. Oh, well, but I got one you don't know. Boom, boom. Oh, you're like that. And it was amazing to me. I was in a conference in Florida with a group from around the country of young leaders from Black Lives Matter, from the Dreamers, from the divestments, student movement, and so on. And all these young black, white, Latino, and Native and white, yeah, everybody there, everybody was participating in this culture of scaring each other over meals, you know, first thing in the morning, brushing teeth, let me scare you. And so it occurred to me, I finally got some time, I was a kind of elder in residence, and I said, I just hope that you are clocking your hours, you know, like lawyers do, and so you can add up your hours of scaring so that you can invoice Donald Trump. Because he wants to scare us all into submission. That's the point, right? That's the point from up there, is to scare us out of doing good work. Scare us out of standing up. Scare us, right? So if you can keep us scared enough, then we can be controlled, right? So you're actually doing his work for him. So I think you ought to, you know, if you're going to do it anyway, consider it a fundraiser for your organization. Bill him, you know, on a weekly basis, how many hours you spent scaring other people. And I think he ought to pay you because he's doing, you know, I mean, he hardly even has to tweet if you're going to just do it all for him. Oh, they said, we are doing the master's work for him. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. But that's what can happen when we lose our center. We can get obsessed with the other instead of turning to our actual source of strength, which to a Quaker mind is lies within. You know, it's okay to think of it more broadly. Nevertheless, there's a center that's available. So, so I thought I'd give you reference points if you want to look into some of these things more. So this is the pair of political scientists who did this work on polarized America. And they, I believe, published that book maybe 2006 or something. And of course, polarization has been galloping along since, so you can extrapolate from their numbers. Okay, another thing I'd like to say about polarization is that, what was it? There's so many things to say about polarization, but I didn't want to try to say everything tonight. So what was another thing? Oh, Warren Buffett has an opinion on it. Warren Buffett, guru kind of person, right? Very, very wise, actually, I think, and very observant, right? Which is why one way he made his billions was being very observant. And he granted an interview to the New York Times in 2006, a wide-ranging interview in which the reporter could just ask him, Mr. Buffett, what do you think about this? Mr. Buffett, what do you think about that? So, scribbling away. So one of the questions was, Mr. Buffett, what do you think about this chatter that's going on in some circles that there's such a thing as class war? Yes. Buffett said, well, of course there's class war. And my class, the rich, started it. And we're winning. That was Mr. Buffett's response, which was duly printed by the New York Times. Credit them. And I don't know how much pushback he got from his peers at the country club or wherever for letting the cat out of the bag. As far as I know, Buffett has no Communist Party connections, right? This is his observation of what's been going on politically in this country for decades. This was a 2006 interview, and there it was. So that's part of this picture, right? Because when you look at his retrospective and then match it up with the political scientists, you find it matches pretty well. That is, his class has been winning, therefore more and more inequality, right? And therefore more and more polarization. So there are things we can conclude from this. Okay, so one recourse that people like to think of that we have hopefully in this society is to go to our elected representatives and get our elected officials to set things right. So I looked into that too, because I thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get our congressional representatives, our senators, or state legislators, or so on, to make things right. And so I was very interested in the political science study. There we go. There we go. The first guy is from Princeton, the second one is from Northwestern. They investigated, in order to try to find out what's what about that, they investigated something like 1,789 federal level policy decisions that were made between if I remember right, 1981 and 2002. It was about a 20-year period. These references are also in my book in the last chapter. But anyway, you can look it up. And what they found, so their interest was, okay, there are all these policy decisions that then have ramifications for the whole society because they're federal level. So let's find out who wanted which policy, right? So of course, there were some times that pretty much everybody wanted the same policy. But there were also many times when there would be a divide with regard to the wisdom of that policy. The majority of the people would say, we want this, and the economic elite would say, we want that. So that was what they were particularly interested in. Who wins the day when the majority happens to disagree with the economic elite? So they tracked all of these decisions that were made on the federal level. Guess who won? Overwhelmingly. Like maybe one or two decisions squeaked by with on the majority side. But almost all the decisions were made on the federal level were made in favor of the economic elite and against the will of the people. So their study reluctantly concludes that if democracy is that the majority rules, that's not what we've got. We don't have that. They didn't use the word oligarchy, but I put it in there because if you're Googling it, just Google oligarchy study and you'll find the reference easily. Google, I love Google. But actually the word oligarchy was assigned to the study by BBC when BBC covered the study. You may not have read that study on the front page of your local paper for obvious reasons, but anyway, there it is. That it turns out we don't have a functioning democracy. That's, again, when was that? 81 to 2002. Now that's before Citizens United, Supreme Court, unleashed way more billions into our political system. So you might even ask, why did the economic elite put way more billions into the political system if they were making all the decisions anyway? Like, what's that about? And I'll just leave it here by saying, I think it's an indication of how precarious they know their situation is. That is, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time, and that they know that we're going to figure this out sooner or later. Well, friends, that's what the Scandinavians did. That is, the Scandinavians, a century ago, were in a very similar situation. It was their economic elites that were calling the shots. They had a pretend democracy, like we do. They had parliament, elections, free elections. So people could tell each other, oh yes, let's go to our parliament, our member of parliament, and ask for this and ask for that. We could lobby. Maybe we could get our point of view across by lobbying. But it didn't work there, even as it doesn't work here. So what they did was, they said, oh, we don't have a democracy. It's a pretend democracy. And yet, we're not happy with being run by the economic elite. They're actually, this is a century ago, they are doing a very poor job. Wouldn't it be great to get rid of them since they're doing a poor job? I mean, it's common enough when somebody's doing a really poor job, they get thrown out of the job, right? So why don't we just throw them out of the job and take over and make a real democracy? Maybe we would make better decisions than they have been making. And that's what they did. So particularly interesting to me, so I tell the story in the book, it's a dramatic story, but I don't want to get into that now. What I want to get into is when they did this, because their timing, as John already tipped you off, their timing is very interesting. They were building their movement. I mean, it started pitifully small, a few workers here, a few farmers there, a few radical students there. It started small, as social movements do. The civil rights movement in this country started pitifully small. Early 1940s, doing sit-ins in Chicago and lunch counters to try to get black Chicagoans the right to a cup of coffee. Very, very small, way back when, right? Okay, but what counts about a social movement is it the little engine that could, or isn't it, right? And as we know, in the case of the civil rights movement, amazing, phenomenal progress was made as a result of their work, and still so much more to do. But given where things were, very, very big power exercise went on at that time. Well, that's what went on in the Scandinavian countries. Little movement grew and grew and grew and grew. It grew in some significant ways that I think we should pay attention to, especially since you've talked about the 4 roles, right? One of the sources of growth that was very important, and I think you helpers will love this, as well as the other roles, is through co-ops. Because what a lot of people felt, oppressed people generally feel this, is we can't really do anything. What have we got? What have we got to show for, our life? We don't know how to do it. In a way, they have a right to run the economy because they can think about stuff like that. But what have we ever run like that, right? So they built co-ops. Very commonsensical, practical co-ops. A few farmers would say, we're really getting screwed by this commercial dairy down the road. What if we, bought a couple of machines and just had a cooperative dairy and market our milk through the cooperative dairy? I mean, what do you think? So they would do that. And a few fisher folk in the west coast of Norway fishing for cod, they would say, well, it would be great to have a bigger boat because then we could get more cod, especially when they happen to be on our shores. We want to really, get them. But I don't have the money to get a bigger boat. You don't have the money to get a bigger boat. But what if we got together and pooled our money, could create a fishing co-op, and we have a bigger boat, we'll go out together and we'll really pull in those cod. That might work. Sounds practical. I don't know if we can do that. Well, maybe we could. Like that. So it was over and over and over and over. People empowering themselves by getting practical things done. And notice this, not only were they empowering themselves, but they were doing it, we were talking about this at dinner, they were doing this in a horizontal fashion, right? Co-owning the co-op, co-owning the dairy, on a horizontal, one person, one vote, or one farm, one vote. But everybody from the priest to the royal family to the education system tells us that society only works when it's vertically organized. Right? Somebody has to tell you what to do. You never know what to do for yourself. But here we are, figuring it out together on a horizontal level. Breakthrough time. Breakthrough time. So not only do we often get a better product, actually, that commercial dairy down the street, they were cutting corners. But our cream and our butter is awesome. It's as good as Pendle Hill's. And not only that, we do it more efficiently, and we do it together, and we know how to do it. Oh my gosh. Well, if we can do this stuff, why can't we run the economy? So you can see the extrapolation, right? So that's one reason why the co-ops are important. And in my 10-point plan for what we should be doing now, I include as one of the 10 points the building of new economy institutions, the building of co-ops. Because we, like them 100 years ago, are really kind of an oppressed bunch of people. I can't tell you, I've been out, Alaska to New Hampshire to Arizona to Colorado. I've been all over the place on this book tour, and the hangdog looks on people when they walk into the bookstore or walk into a meeting. You're like, I guess we can't do anything like that. Americans, who, when I was a boy, was told are the can-do people. We like problems because we can solve them, right? And that great, picture of the woman, we can do it. Remember all that? Well, some of you are old enough. I mean, some of you don't remember that. No, you do not remember that. But anyway, actually, there's a funny thing that I do in bookstores. When I see an age range, which is usual in the bookstores, a generational range, I ask people, okay, how many of you have been taught that an American identifier, something that identifies what's characteristic of Americans, is that we are a can-do people? Raise your hand if you've heard that. A bunch of you raise it right now. Yeah. And every single time, there's an age difference. There's an age break. The older people's hands go up, and the younger people's hands do not. So here we are running the biggest empire in the world, but it's not we who are running it. It's the economic elite who is running the biggest empire in the world. And we are being subjected to the empire, as well as the people outside our borders, and have that hangdog look as a result. So we need basics. We need back to co-ops, back to can you do anything? And what strikes me as particularly interesting is that education doesn't seem to matter. I mean, those old, Swedish farmers and the Norwegian fisher folk and stuff had probably 4th grade education at most 100 years ago, right? And so, as somebody who believes in education, like I do, I sometimes make my living as a professor, so I have to believe in education, right? And so, some of us who believe in education will say, oh, well, the oppression is when people haven't been educated. But educated people, we are not oppressed. We listen to NPR or something, or we read New Yorker or whatever we do, right? And guess what? You can have very oppressed PhDs who do not know that they can be powerful in their environment, whether on campus or in their environment in the world. You can have very oppressed people no matter how much stuff is in their heads in terms of knowledge base, because if the attitude that has gone along with that is one of colonization. And that's what's been going on. So, anyway, so that's what was going on, and you can read more of that in my book about the evolution. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that with various kinds of preparation, they reached their peak at the time of, especially I'll focus, because the countries have some differences, I'll focus on Sweden and Norway, at the time of their greatest polarization, when things were the ugliest. When Nazis were marching on the streets of Oslo and of Stockholm with swastikas, brown shirts, yelling anti-Semitic slogans, the whole ugly stuff. And at the same time, communists were organizing for dictatorship of the proletariat. I mean, how's that for a spectrum, folks? We don't really have much of a political spectrum here compared with fully articulated fascism and fully articulated Marxism. Like, how about that for a spread? And they were both contesting for power in Sweden and Norway. I'm talking 20s and 30s. And that is when the people's movement found itself and surged forward and threw out the economic elite of those countries, so that they could take over those countries and create democracy. And once you have democracy, it's pretty natural to invent a new economic system that will work way better than the old economic system. And so that's what they did. What economists call the Nordic economic model was invented in that period, the 20s and 30s, and implemented then in the following decades. So they invented this economic model that far outperforms the United States, as recognized by the Black Lives Matter's vision that was issued on August 1st, when just last year, August 1st, New York Times covered it, The Guardian covered it, it was covered some by the mass media, in which the movement for Black Lives, which includes a lot of economic provisions, I read those provisions and I said, oh my gosh, the economic vision of the movement for Black Lives lines up with what works in Scandinavia, which is the highest performing economic system. Which means that whoever wrote the Movement for Black Lives vision, whatever bunch of people did that, they didn't put their names on it, but whatever bunch did that, were not just conjecturing some economic system out of their brains, like imaginations. Wouldn't it be wonderful if? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had free higher education? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the health care of all of everybody was met? They didn't. Maybe they did it out of their imagination, and it's just luck. But for whatever reason, what we can say with confidence is that these are the best practices that humans have invented in the history of the world, and those are the practices that are being put forward by the Movement for Black Lives for us to endorse, as the American Friends Service Committee already has, and for all of us to endorse, and for all of us to get on. So right away, this puts us way ahead of where the Nordics were when they were going into their polarization. Because they didn't have a fully formulated economic system. I mean, they had ideas, they had some turned out great ideas, but they hadn't ever governed, right? And they didn't have the nuts and bolts ready to put into place, and they were into the polarization. But they did have a vision that expressed those. They did have a vision for equality. They really had that vision, and the rough agreement that they were able to put into this vision was enough to win the majority support and throw out the economic elite. So one conclusion I come from out of that is that it really, if you're serious about power and you really want to push those folks aside so that we can run things, we the majority can run things, then we do need a vision. Because I think it's very fair for anyone, when we're proposing something, to say, what sense does that make? And for us to say what sense it makes, right? I mean, not just on the basis of, well, we hate inequality. Well, that's nice, right? So what are you going to put in its place? Well, we hate poverty. Oh, right. People have hated poverty for many, many centuries. What are you going to do to get rid of poverty? So what the Scandinavians did in their vision was they showed, we're going to get rid of poverty, and this is what we're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And they did get rid of poverty. That's what they did. We'll chapter on that in my book, how they got rid of poverty. So it's possible, I believe, to capture a majority of, capture is the wrong word, invite the support of a majority of the population if we learn to be upfront about what we want, and then if we build a movement around what we want instead of a movement around what we don't want.
Yes.
I see the heads nodding. Aren't you more attracted to positive goals than you are just a nah, 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 nah. I mean, nah, nah, nah is kind of satisfying for a minute, but it doesn't really. It does, you want another meal pretty quick. It doesn't, it's not satisfying. It's not satisfying. We could do so much better. And we've got so much creativity. Now that's where education comes in. Why aren't we charging the intellectuals, whether they're teaching in college and universities or not, why aren't we charging universities, come up with this vision, build on the movement for Black Lives and the other visionary work that's going on in the new economy movement and so on, come up with a vision that will attract a majority of people so we can get behind it and go ahead and follow the example of those other countries 100 years ago. And it's so much easier now than it was then, because then they couldn't say, hey, guess what works? Because nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever done the Nordic economic model before they invented it. So they were, that's one reason why I called the book Viking Economics, because Vikings were willing to go where no one had gone before. And no one in their town had gone before, out over the sea in these open boats. We don't even have to do that. Folks, we don't even have to be all that bold and brave, because we can just take what's already been established as the superior economic model, far outperforming the United States, and we can just implement it, and then we'll find their problems with it, and good on us, because we'll be a democracy then, and we'll tweak, right? And we'll change, and we'll grow, and why not? No? No. Problem.
There's a huge racial divide in this country.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you mention the organization Black Lives Matter,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
it's dead. My belief is, and I can be wrong, doesn't happen often, but I can be wrong, that there was not a huge animosity and racial divide in the Scandinavian countries that we are just getting whiffs of now. But I think that it's huge. The animosity
Mm-hmm.
on both sides,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without judgment on one side. But the animosity and the divide is so huge, George. How to surmount that?
There we can learn from our own experience, because we can't learn from the Scandinavians, as you said. They didn't have that challenge. So you're right. We can learn from our own experience, and that is the experience of specific campaigns that are going after specific goals and require unity to get. For example, United Auto Workers, early 1930s, Detroit, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, where those huge auto factories were, Ford, General Motors, that kind of thing, right? Who were adamantly opposed to unionization. Well, what did the workers want? All the workers wanted decent wages, right? Vacation, benefits, and so on. And to be treated decently and to be regarded as human beings rather than as cogs in a machine. And they knew that only by getting a union would they get that. All the black workers knew that, all the white workers knew that. However, up until then, General Motors, Chrysler, and the others were counting on racism to keep people divided. And then, hey, there's not going to be a union, right? So these are the conversations that I believe happened on the part of cagey white organizers who would go to white workers and say, okay, I know what you think about I know what you think about black people. And here's the reality. We're never going to get Ford Motor Company to settle with us as long as you are unwilling to have the back of your co-workers who are a different color. You are going to, if you want that, you're going to have to handle your racism. Now, you can think anything you want to think inside your head, but you're going to have to handle that, because when push comes to shove, you are going to have the back of those guys over there that you refuse to get on with. Now, maybe you prefer shitty wages, way overtime, not seeing your family, terrible future, terrible occupational safety and health. Maybe that's all right with you. That's because your racism tells you that's the number one thing that you want. Well, okay. Then I don't know why I'm wasting my time as an organizer. But if by chance your family would like a better future, then that's the price you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to handle your racism. Did it work? We know it worked. United Auto Workers was built as a cross-racial union and defeated the economic elite and became the most progressive union in the country, partly because it had so many black members, and black members tend to be way more progressive than white members, of course. But in the mix, that's what happened. So I think there we can learn a very big lesson. That is, I don't think, let me put it the other way. It's not what I don't think, it's what I do think. It's what I think is that there's something about a campaign with very specific goals that people can really see. Like, these are specific things we can get, and the only way we can get them is through unity, so, damn it, we'll unite. But it has to be campaign level, not ideology level. And that's why a successful movement is going to be built through campaigns. Specific campaigns. Now, that doesn't mean the helpers can't be very helpful, and we have an earthquake action team helpers, and thank goodness we eat much better for it. And they are the ones who remember to bring along the stuff for our blisters. I'm one of those rebel guys, so I keep forgetting the blister stuff. And thank goodness we have helpers who bring the blister stuff. When I came out of jail last time in Washington D.C. at 3 a.m., it was the first time I was ever greeted with champagne. We have some great helpers anyway. They are out there at 3 a.m. with champagne for their jailbirds. So there's room for all in a movement, as there was in Montgomery, Alabama. Remember when people were taxiing each other around and they were cooking those chicken dinners and all that? Oh my gosh, it's all good. But the thing was, just as Montgomery bus boycott had a very specific, right? Boom, get the unity. So it's campaigns that really pay off, because there's a tangibility and an appeal to self-interest that enables people to swallow their racism and other stuff. Because there's a lot of ego that always shows up. I'm going to be first, or I'm going to be, and all that stuff goes on routinely. You can count on it. It's human nature. You get all that stuff. And a campaign keeps people on like a steady, in a way that one-off protests, as much as I enjoyed the Women's March the day after the inauguration, can never do that for a movement. A one-off protest can never do the development of solidarity and the personal growth and willingness to risk. It can never do that kind of work that an ongoing campaign can do. This is my view. Yes?
I just would like a little more of a definition of what you mean by campaign versus ideology.
Great. Yeah, an ideology is a set of ideas, right, of where we'll go and so on. So I did give endorsement of the vision. That's kind of ideological, right? Although it doesn't need to be stated with a lot of isms in it. I mean, Bernie got away with socialism, but, most of us, an example of that would be when I sit down with my brother who voted for Donald Trump, and listens to Rush Limbaugh all the time. I don't know if you know Rush. Rush Limbaugh, yeah, right-wing radio and so on. He's all over that, right? And he's my brother, and I love him. And often when I come back from Norway, I'll have a conversation like this. I'll say, Bob, how are your grandkids doing? And his grandkids include two who are disabled intellectually in various ways. And he'll tell me how things are progressing, how he's so proud of his daughter. She knocks herself out, advocating, just like I don't know how much longer she can go on, just trying, to get those kids what they need. So it's interesting, I'm just back from Norway. How they would handle that situation in your family over there would be blah, 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 blah. Yeah, well, it's part of the larger scheme. It's their healthcare scheme, in which they think every family should have its own doctor. And actually, there are more doctors in Norway than here, because doctors have free medical school, so they do better and so on. And I'm talking practicality, how it would work for Bob, and how it would work for his family. And I stop, and he says, "Sounds like a plan." Now, he's just signed up for socialized medicine. And he loves Rush Limbaugh and voted for Donald Trump. So that would be using ideology, but not putting ideas up front, right? Not putting the ism up front. which we could do. We know how to be practical, right? Okay, so, but campaign, yeah, so I guess I'm saying, yeah, okay. So what a campaign is though, a campaign, Lena, oh my God, what is a campaign? A campaign is choosing a deeply felt issue, an issue that people care deeply about, like say, jobs. And choosing a target that could do something about that, could make jobs. And among the various targets, you might have several, you might choose a more vulnerable one for whatever reasons, right? And so you make a demand out of that deeply felt issue, and you demand that the target come across with it. And then and of course you form a group, so the group is able to sustain itself over time and escalate. And that's again where the one-off demonstrations don't work so well, but the campaign escalates. So Lena and I were in a group that took on the 7th largest bank in the country. Right now, Joan's part of this group. Now, this was a group that started in a living room. There were people who thought, "Oh, George, you're cute. You know, you're right. You're going to take on the 7th largest bank in the country. You just started in your living room. That's very, very nice. You must be those witnessing Quakers, those people who stand up for anything and are totally impractical." Right? Okay, so we ended up though in 13 states, and we forced the 7th largest bank out of financing mountaintop removal coal mining, and they were the #1 financer of it when we started. We could only do that because we escalated and because we grew. So from their power-oriented point of view and their economic interest point of view, all they could see was this thing growing. I mean, you'd make a movie of this, right? The blob. Right? It's filling the house now, and the family's outside in the yard. That's what they saw. This scary blob that showed no sign. After 5 years, showed no sign of stopping, and just growing and growing. And all the time, we were making their life terrible. We were especially attacking their brand. A lot of economic entities need a brand, and they want to sell their product, right? And we were defaming. One of the first things they did was take down a billboard that was just very close to Pendle Hill that said, "Come to PNC Bank and open your account because we are the greenest bank you ever saw." Green, the green bank. They took that billboard down. You get the idea. So that's what you do. You design a campaign. Now, sometimes it's way simpler than that. It's for students, in North Carolina, in Greensboro, saying tomorrow, having kind of party in a dorm room and saying, "Tomorrow, let's go down and demand that cup of coffee." And they know perfectly well this is not one-off. You don't play around in North Carolina. You don't do it unless you're going to keep doing it, and it's going to be day after day after day, right? But they're doing their campaign with regard to that lunch counter. Yeah, well, but the next county over, there's another historically black college that has been, playing football forever with the first, and their competitive relationship. They are not going to, put up with being outdone, right? So they have to take on their lunch counter, and then 3 counties over, another one, and so on and so on. Next thing you know, you have a sit-in movement in 1960, but the movement is all consisting of campaigns with a deeply felt grievance, which was this store will take my money, if for aspirin, but it won't give me a cup of coffee. It was just so grating, right? It was so degrading, right? So a deeply felt thing. They had demand, which is serve the damn cup of coffee. Like, come on. And the target was vulnerable, it turned out, because Woolworths, which was the biggest one that they would go after, also had northern stores, which meant the possibility of allies in the north helping the people in the south who did the heavy lifting in order to crunch the store into giving that cup of coffee. So that's what a campaign is like. But it's escalation, escalation, growing, growing, growing. And it's possible to do all that, and then the people grow along with it personally because they are engaged in an organic process. Can you see how that might work? Yeah.
I do see what you're saying, and yet I find myself still troubled by the fundamental difference. So even when people come together across racial lines, it's to address economic situation and to benefit all parties or both parties or.
Right.
Could you repeat that for the
I will, for the
viewers
TV.
at home? If we're gonna have the exchange, I need to come around with the mic.
Okay.
People won't hear.
No, I'll repeat it.
Thank you. And yet, obviously, the United Auto Workers did not solve racial issues in the Detroit-Flint area. The racial divide in our country has never been addressed. And so even if you even out money and power, how does it address the pain that remains in the system and the deep inequality over centuries? That still troubles my heart. And
Right. It's a great question. Okay, the question is, okay, you've got an example within a kind of framework of economic interest in a corporation, union being a solution, black and white workers working together, then they get decent jobs and so on, probably the best jobs overall in Detroit. Available to black people became available that way and so on and so on. So you've made a difference there, but you haven't made a difference in the big picture. And how do we make a difference in the big picture? Is that your question, right? And so one thing people could do would be to say, this is working. Now, how do we apply this smart approach to another area? Schools, for example. Because schools are a place where there's terrible segregation still. In the North, as there was then, and still is. So schools need to be addressed in that way as well. So let's launch a campaign for equality, racial equality in schools. Now that was done in some places, but rather rarely. It was very hard for people to look at one area of success and then decide, well, let's put it in another area. And then people looking at two areas going and moving forward might say, what about hospitalization and healthcare? That whole area, there's rampant racial segregation or discrimination in that area. Let's do a campaign and clean up healthcare. And then people might say, well, but what about voting? Voting is really poor. Well, then let's do a campaign around voting. Yeah, but what about police? Police treatment is terrible. There's police brutality against black people in a way that there isn't against white people. Well, let's do a campaign about that. In other words, I'm talking about an approach that actually works. And one of the things that I don't understand about my people, because we like to think of ourselves as pragmatic, is why don't we copy from each other things that work and apply them in different areas until we clean up the whole deal?
I'm
I
sorry,
get it.
who are you claiming is your people?
Who am I claiming what?
When you say my people, who are you claiming is your people?
The whole ball of wax, the whole American, I claim the whole American people as my people.
Okay, I just wasn't,
Yeah.
I wasn't clear if you were saying Quakers or
Oh, yeah,
professors or white people
No, I
or
claim
something.
all
I
the people. Yeah, that's why I was first arrested in the civil rights demonstration. It's the only, everybody's my people. Yeah. But, I mean, wouldn't it make sense? It just seems so sensible to me. I don't get why people would say, oh, well, something worked brilliantly there, but we certainly wouldn't want to try it over there. Now, fortunately, of course, big picture, it was tried over and over. But it was often tried by different clubs of people. For example, Cesar Chavez, noting that nonviolent direct action campaigns were working brilliantly for black people, and not just about coffee and just about buses, but also about over and over and over and over. voter registration and so on. So Chavez said, well, people tried for decades to organize farm workers and not succeeded, but maybe they just haven't had the right model around. Now here's Dr. King and SNCC and the others showing a model that actually works. How would I apply that here? And we did that in California, and next thing you know, we had the National Farm Workers Union organized. Not next thing you know, it was what, 5 years until they won that first boycott, because racism is very tough, and tackling class on top makes it even tougher. But he was a really practical guy. So in fact, there's a wonderful book you might run into by Jerry Farber called, it's about the various movements that spun off for the civil rights movement, because not only did Chavez get that, students coming back from the South often started demanding curriculum reform in the university level, right? And then there got to be a school reform movement on the part in secondary schools and elementary schools, and we got a really exciting brew of school reform going on. But then elders, people with hair the color of mine, started saying, well, wait a minute, what about the treatment of elders? We're one of the biggest poverty-stricken, parts of the population, white and black. And what about us? So the Gray Panthers were organized. And Puerto Ricans in New York started organizing. And the Brown Berets of LA started organizing. And more and more and more and more. The women's movement was actually stimulated by experiences in the South, and grew and grew and grew. And so women started acting outrageously, that is to say defiantly, and often in campaigns. And then the LGBT people coming on saying, what about us? And then they started organizing campaigns. So Jerry Farber's book is called, They Should Have Served That Cup of Coffee. It unleashed such a degree in the 60s and the 70s of transformational energy in the United States that Warren Buffett, thank you Warren Buffett, noted there was a class war declared on us in 1980, led by Ronald Reagan, right? Practically the first thing he did, air traffic controllers went on strike. He fired them to break the union. The shot fired across the bow, right? This is the kind of administration. In other words, it's class war time, folks. Air traffic safety, do you care? I mean, when you get in a plane, do you kind of care that it doesn't crash into another plane? I mean, God, are you kidding? Playing around with air traffic safety? And he did that because the stakes were that high, because the natives were restless. The American people were on the move in the 60s and 70s, and there would be far more justice now if we had continued. So this is a very important part of the saga, and a very important thing for all of us anti-racists to understand. Bayard Rustin was right. Bayard Rustin, key advisor to Dr. King, big brother to Dr. King in particular respects, and so on and so on. Very, very, very smart man. I sat at his feet every time I got a chance. I was just like, Bayard influenced me enormously. I heard him say over and over, in the early 60s, he said, now look, if we don't get this economic justice thing right, in 50 years, we're going to have outrageous racism still. He was right. So that's what we needed to do. In other words, we were on the right road in the 60s and 70s. The economically understood we were on the right road and decided to do a counter-offensive. So, what happens to people when there's a counter-offensive going on then? Well, I know if somebody goes like this toward my face, I flinch. Okay, it's a human reaction. We have to forgive ourselves. We do instinctively flinch. Yeah. Okay. But a few minutes later, we might think, okay, but I'm not just all about reflex. I have what do you call it? Neocortex or something, as well as a flinching capacity here. I'm not just all reflexes. I could try thinking my way as a waiter Some of you have taken some martial arts, probably. I mean, warriors are taught to think. So I could think about what the counteroffensive is intended to make me do. What is it intended to make you do? Huh? Joan?
I was just saying, then go there before they do it.
And go there before they do.
Yeah.
But instead, what the movements did in the 80s was went on the defensive. The civil rights movement did. It did. It went on the defensive. The labor movement went on the defensive. The women's movement went on the defensive. With regard to reproductive rights. Look, we're still working on reproductive rights. This much later. The school reform movement went on defensive. The environmental movement went on defensive. Everyone but one. I may be wrong on this. Challenge me if I am, but I can only think of one movement that did not go on the defensive in that period. Okay, now, what's wrong with going on the defensive? Well, what would generals say to you at that moment? Generals would say, you will never win anything on the defensive. It's elementary military strategy. You can only win on the offensive. Okay, but let's say I'm in a Quaker study center, and generals are not the last word to us, maybe. So let me reach for somebody else, like Gandhi. We think pretty well of him, right? What does Gandhi say about going on the defensive? Gandhi said over and over, do not go on the defensive. The only way to win is to go on the offensive. That is the only way to win. Okay, but let's say you don't believe in generals and you don't like Gandhi either. You're too vegetarian or something. Okay, so you're looking for some authority. What does folk wisdom say about this question? Please fill out this sentence. The only defense is folk wisdom. Now, who am I to disagree with folk wisdom? And then we have the actual historical experience of the 80s and the 90s, in which every movement but one went on the defensive and lost and continue to lose today.
That's right.
Now, are you, please, if you're willing to put an argument forward for why defensive is a good idea, please make that argument now. There's one movement that did not go on the defensive, and that is the LGBT people. Do you remember how in the 80s, it was AIDS time? Extremely dangerous time. I'm gay, and I was in with gangs of people who would be saying, look, it's going to be concentration internship camps, to isolate the people with this awful disease. Every opportunity, and remember the radical right, the Bible right, this only shows us God's will, right, all of that. Okay, did LGBT people have a good reason to go on the defensive?
Absolutely.
I don't know if it was Gandhi, maybe it was generals, maybe it was folk wisdom, whatever reason.
It was life and death is what it was.
Yeah.
On the offensive. On the offensive. And won. So then the homophobes were saying, what's going on here? This is terrible. Everybody else is crumbling. Everybody else is giving up on justice, except the LGBT people. What's up with them? And next thing you know, the LGBT people are saying, and by the way, we want equal marriage. Oh no, not equal marriage. My God, you get to tens of thousands of years, shaking. Oh my God, the patriarchy. And then not only that, how about equal rights in the military? Oh my God, there must be a homosexual agenda. Yes, there is. And now it's bathrooms. There's no stopping these people. What is it? The LGBT bill on the offensive. It's not rocket science. It's not the sheer brilliance. I mean, my people are brilliant, but it's not the sheer brilliance of LGBT people. It's just folklore, folks. It's just being on the offensive. That's all it is. Now, when the civil rights movement gets back on the offensive, and there's signs that that's going to happen, that is happening, I think, with the Black Lives Matter. And when the labor movement gets back on the offensive, white and black labor movements, both of those, and Chicanas and all the rest. And when all these movements that have been in this posture and therefore losing get back on their feet and assert with full self-respect, we will make enormous progress again. And then we can apply all the lessons from Scandinavia and wherever else, including our own country. But victimhood will never win anything. And claiming victimhood as a badge of anything will not get us anyplace. It will not achieve unity. It will not substitute for a lack of vision. It will not substitute for a lack of courage. It just won't do us any good. But we need to be fighters, folks. Now, I know Rebel is only one. I got you covered. Rebel's only one, and you made a poor choice if you didn't want Rebel tonight. But anyway, but you can see how Rebels get all scarred and beaten up and stuff, and really need these other three. They need the advocate to get in there and find out what's going on in the weird mind of the economic elite, and be able to come back and say, well, this will give them enough face so that they can finally give you what you want, and we need the helper to keep the things going. And we need the organizer, because rebels without organization means tiny bands of martyrs. Is what it means. Sorry? That's not appealing. No, I'm not. Let's not do that. So we need organizers bad, and I'm told that there are a bunch of you here. But please put your organizing energy into something that's going to work, which is campaigns, instead of something that isn't going to work. Because we need that valuable energy there. John? No. Yeah.
I had a quick one. I just had a quick one because as a young person, I've thought a lot about George's book, and I've also thought a lot about the particular challenges of the United States and the questions that were raised, Urbana and Wendy on that side of the room, I think are really important questions. And I also think I've just become convinced in my time on the planet that we can't think ourselves out of any of these problems. We can't think ourselves or talk ourselves out of racism. We can't think ourselves or talk ourselves out of economic inequality. We can't think ourselves or talk ourselves out of the climate crisis. And what campaigns offer is the direct experience of practicing. And some folks don't need to practice. Their lived experience is coming up in conflict and confrontation with these problems on a regular basis, and just by existing in the world as the way they want to exist, are sort of waging a campaign for their own humanity daily. And that's why I think we need to, and I'm speaking now generally to white people and young people and folks who have the energy to give, who aren't in the same way being challenged to wage a campaign for our own humanity every single day, to join in campaigns and follow the leadership that's out there. And that's one of the things I love about the Power Local Green Jobs campaign. Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, who is here as our opening plenary speaker, and the work that Power is doing. We've learned so much in working on this campaign with Power, but we're working for something and learning from each other and making mistakes, and we're actually doing something. We're not thinking our way into solving racism or inequality in Philadelphia. We're not thinking our way or trying to find a perfect answer, and we're making mistakes, and we have to be humble. But I do think taking action in campaigns brings us closer to actually getting the things that we want. And I also think to the questions around what are the unique challenges in the US, we do have, I think, unique challenges around the history of race in the US, and I'm appreciating what Kitty just said this morning, which is we did end slavery, and that I do think is worse than where we are now. And so anything that's been done is possible, and anything that's been done in Norway is possible, and anything that's been done in the US is possible. And I think we have to believe we can do things and try them.
I have to write down what you just said. Anything that has happened
Anything that's been done.
Anything that's been done is possible.
He used to put a twinkle in his eye when he said, Boulding's first law.
I think what we're basically saying is it's theory and praxis, and the praxis informs our theory, and as we move along, learning as we go is what Lena is saying. By engagement with each other, that is where we're building and learning relationships that were so important, solidarity that you were mentioning. So, theory and praxis, if you want to look at it that way, or faith and practice.
Faith and practice. Faith and practice.
Thank you. I want to say a bunch of words.
You had a great bunch earlier.
I want to say a bunch more.
A bunch more words.
Yes.
Here it is.
Escalate, target, campaign. Can you hear me? Frontline, counteroffensive, offensive, defensive, on the ground, waging, engagement. So how do we, the big we, all of us, and the smaller, much smaller actually, we Quakers, move away from martial language? I don't mean to pick on or your talk at all.
Good example.
This is
an example.
our mouths are full of bullets.
Sure.
In the world, in this country, in this culture. Historically, when a discourse becomes so problematic that people begin to reject it, they seek another framework. And I feel, just thinking as, with my historian's hat on, I feel as though we're at that moment. I feel that there are languages trying to emerge if we can clear space for them. And historically, the only way to do that is to be self-critical about our own language in order to take it down, take it apart, mix it up, mix our metaphors, make them sort of contest with one another, and start to try to find synonyms that don't participate in that grand reflex. And it could be as simple as just talking about constructive versus destructive, as opposed to talking about offensive and defensive. I don't have the answer to this. I have some ideas that have to do with ecological metaphors that are also part of our discourse. But I think if it's going to happen, it'll happen because of Quakers.
I hope not.
I think if it's going to happen, it'll happen because of any group who has a long history of consciousness around peace. The discourse has to come organically. And I think Quakerism provides that fertile ground for it. It's a very heavy lift. It's monumental, but I do think there's an opportunity. And when we reframe our ways of thinking, we get to do new things. Our praxis changes. I could go on for a
Thank
really
you.
long
No,
time.
no,
I've thought about this a really long
But
time.
I think you put it really clearly, and also you speak for many, many people. Many Quakers would feel that, and feel that one edge on which a movement can advance is on the language edge. So it's related to vision, it's a creative enterprise, and by reformulating, sometimes things come into view and possibility that were not by previous polarizations and previous. So I think you're on a useful track. You want to get in on this, though, before I respond.
the list again.
Sorry?
I'd like to hear the list again before we.
Oh, the list again, okay.
Yeah, the words came out, the analysis.
They came out fast, yeah.
I don't have to backtrack.
Thanks so much, yes, thanks.
Escalate, target, campaign, frontline, counteroffensive, offensive and defensive, on the ground, waging, engagement. Some of these have other meanings, but when you take them all together, you see where we are.
All right. So, a couple of thoughts about that. One is that is certainly one major strand that we find in 20th century Quakerism. However, Quakerism offers other strands as well. The Quakerism of the 17th century Civil War New England might be more appropriate for us today than whatever, 1930 or something. Because the word they reached for in order to characterize their attitude toward what was going on was the Lamb's War. Right? And that word war had meant beheading of kings and all that stuff. Plenty bloody association. And they chose the Lamb's War as a way of expressing that ferocity, that passion. Right? They were led by a military kind of guy named George Fox, a warrior, nonviolent warrior, who was so comfortable with his warrior self that when he would show up in a market square and be chatting with people, next thing you know, there'd be a bunch of soldiers around him. They just smelled his warrior energy. He was full of it. And in fact, he was offered a commission in the army because they thought, well, soldiers want to follow this guy. This guy's a warrior. He was a warrior, no question. And he organized, he was also an organizer, right? So all the organizers can be excited. He organized the Valiant 60, the 60 people who were, carrying out, who were the main lieutenants in his Lamb's War. And they were a bunch of warriors themselves, right? So maybe for this moment in history, maybe there's another moment in history when we need to calm ourselves down. But I find Quakers plenty calm down. And and plenty into reconciliation. And Quakers who were questioning are going after a bank. Here's a bank that was doubling cancer rates in Appalachia, increasing birth defects. And we had plenty of Quakers saying, you gotta understand their point of view. There's always two points of view. Right. So what about justice-seeking Quakers? What about the Quaker Jihad that was launched in New England? Because the Puritans, the Puritans were like they were a theocratic gang. That's what they were. They were the contemporary Taliban for their period. And that needed to be broken up. Now, I haven't been aware in the last 40 years of Quakers deciding, oh, there's the Taliban, it's time for us to launch a jihad and break that Taliban up. Why aren't we doing that? That's a Quaker legacy as much as anything else. But they did it. They left northwest England and other places. They sailed across the sea. They waded into Puritan Massachusetts, and they broke up that Taliban. That's what they did. They broke up the theocracy. Non-violently, of course. Because we're in touch with a bigger understanding of human beings than that there were only the roles we play. So there's another strand of Quakerism. Doesn't invalidate the strand that appeals to you. I think there's a place for it in the creation of the new day, the day that comes after we have elbowed the economic elite out. But for elbowing economic elites out, I think we already have our legacy very clear in Quakerism. And one reason why, when you said I'd love for Quakers to lead this, is because Quakers can't lead this or play a substantial role in it from the legacy you're talking about. Because this is polarization time, and you either address what's really happening in the world, or you don't. And the way to address what's going on in the world is to step into the world, not to withdraw from it and make observations about it. Yes?
I'm from Baltimore.
You're from Baltimore.
So I'm just going to leave it at that.
What does Baltimore mean? I don't know.
I'm in it.
You're in it.
I'm in it.
You're in it. Yeah.
I work on police brutality issues.
All right. There we go.
But just real quick.
Also, I think a special value for the kind of thinking you're doing is found among advocates. Right? But very often, the job of people is to create street heat. The rebels are they're operating street heat. They're making it impossible to do police support police brutality anymore from the top, and then making it okay is the job of the advocates.
Yeah. Just really quickly, I don't want to take up too much time. I'm talking really about on the level of grand strategy rather than strategy. And I think that's where language is critical. I mean, it's critical everywhere, but I think it's where being able to see the overarching framing and see how that selects for what counts as action, what counts as valor, what counts as success. Those frames, such as a military frame, drags all that with it. And in that frame, certain kinds of skills are valorized and certain other kinds of skills are not. And that's what I want us to think about.
Well, I think about it quite a lot. You see, it's true that words are everything you say. In addition, words are bridges. So I can talk in a way, I can use words that bridge me to somebody who is deeply angry, is in the polarization and is wanting to act. Or I can use words that fall away because they have no meaning for that person. So for communication, we actually do need to relate to what people are experiencing. So yes, the job of the artist is, the creator, is to create new. I want to support that. But we don't all show up in those abstract art museums where people are doing the new. There's also the people who are more stirred by Picasso's Guernica or whatever, and are roused to an effective and passionate action by that. And we do need communication skills. Now, I would say Quakers in my meeting are really terrible at communicating with people outside our bubble. Really terrible. People come in with a different communication style, and Quakers in coffee hour in my meeting stand around, they have no idea how to communicate. Right? So, again, I think you're saying something really important, and I'm saying something really important, which is I see a huge need for words to communicate with the actual condition of other people, speak to the condition of others. I think speaking to the condition is really important. And I also think grabbing the legacy of Quakers from the times when they were most like ours and most needed, lamb's warriors, is what's needed. And it's not to invalidate what you're doing, but just to say different moments in different places. Yeah.
Is the mic running around, or do I need it?
Just because.
We love
Oh,
you.
yes, I'm forgetting.
I grew up in the Puerto Rican independence movement, so I grew up being used to the idea that I was always being recorded. Well, I just wanted to comment on this conversation here because to me it brings up a dilemma, and I love dilemmas. And dilemmas aren't always to be resolved, sometimes they're to be navigated. So that when I think about, one of the problems is that military thinkers are some of the only people who write and talk about strategy. And write and talk about conflict. And conflict is inherent in nature. Conflict is not just a military thing, but they're the only ones using the language and coming up with language for it. And we need to be able to talk about these things, and we don't want to dehumanize ourselves by taking on all the toxicity that comes with that. And I think that's what a dilemma that is navigable rather than resolvable is that as we go along, it's a trade-off. We have to think, how much do we need this language in order to explain something that we can't figure out how else to explain it, versus how much might this drag us down a rabbit hole of dehumanization. And we really, it's just a tension, it's an organic tension that we have to live with. I think having that consciousness of it is essential. In any dilemma is that we have to have both sides of it in mind at a time so we can figure out what is the right balance at any moment.
I have in mind the Selma movie showing Dr. King not using martial language and rousing people, and, right? Speaking to people in an idiom that deeply resonated for them. But I also know his idiom didn't necessarily work in Philadelphia. So this whole bridge question. Yes, over there. Over here. Oh, the shifting mic.
I'm not sure you've completed your thought for the evening and we've jumped into conversation, but I'd like to go back to one of your points, which is about all of the movements in the 80s going on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier today, we heard from the sanctuary movement,
Mm-hmm.
and Joanna Macy would use the language of holding actions, and some of us need to be holding back or defending. I'd love it if you would just share a few examples that you feel are relevant to us right now in our historic moment of how to transition from a defensive stance to the offensive stance. I'm especially interested around climate issues, but I would welcome any of the human rights examples. I think you have a lot to offer us on that, and I would love it if you'd address that. Thanks.
Sure, sure. Well, one of the tip-offs about whether you're being defensive is, are you trying to keep previously won games, or are you moving the goalposts? Are you saying, no, now we want that? So, for example, with regard to health care, the Democrats are all about keeping previously held gains of the Obamacare. That's what they're all about. That's why they'll lose. Democrats are great at losing. They've been incredible. There are some people I just run into, ordinary folks, who actually think Democrats are smart strategists and they ought to do what the Democrats do. Democrats are terrible strategists. So they are on the defensive, right? So I just came from Seattle last week, where there was a major conference of physicians who are for single payer healthcare. They understand this is the moment to demand single payer.
Absolutely.
Now, realistic people inside the Beltway will tell them, no, 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 it's not what we can get, da 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 da. But paradigm busting is part of revolution. And if the paradigm we've settled on is one that, you know, greedy insurance companies pretty much like, because it brought so many customers, Obamacare brought so many customers to them, and using our tax money to do it. Yeah, enriching the insurance company with our tax money, right? So, you know, now's the time to charge ahead. So that's going on the offensive. So that's a very, very clear distinction right now. I think that's the most ripe thing to be doing right now. If I weren't in the equate work, I would be in the single payer work, because this is the moment. For example, it splits the Trump vote. Tremendous lot of people who voted for Trump desperately need dependable, decent health care. Desperately need that. And know that the Obamacare formula was inadequate. You know it. Why are the Democrats defending something actually nobody loves? I haven't yet met anybody who loves Obamacare. But what people can love is the system that the Scandinavians have. And we can have it. Absolutely no reason why we can't have it. Absolutely no reason why we can't have it. So we should go with that. So that would be an example of going on the offensive. Yeah. Other examples? Let's see. Well, what we're doing now, you know, Lena and Joan and a bunch of us are doing now, is saying utilities have been given a pass. Electrical utilities. Here they are gobbling up fossil fuels, and nobody's paying attention. Wealthy corporations. They have to get electricity anyway, so we can turn the switch and the light will go on. Why aren't they buying the electricity off solar panels installed in poor communities like North Philly and Chester by people living there, returned citizens and others? A range of job skills, perfect, training, opportunity, good jobs. Why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they taking responsibility? And if they won't take responsibility, why are we giving monopoly power to an irresponsible corporation? That's pretty bad. So what the Boulder, Colorado people did was they said that to their utility, and the utility kept saying, oh no, we could, no. So Boulder said, well, you're out of here. So they're setting up a municipal utility. So they can have, so they can get rid of fossil fuels and do it right. Because the economic elite has no intention of doing it right. Now that's going on the offensive. Right? Equate hasn't threatened Pico with that yet. We have it in the back of our minds.
Could be on the escalator.
Could be on the escalator. Exactly. It's great to have a lot of tidbits waiting for us, right, Dina? We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Yeah. So, you get the appeal? You get the appeal?
I actually get the appeal. I wanted you to be more specific because the movement we heard about today feels like a holding action. We're trying to keep people from.
It is a holding action. That's a mistake.
A lot of
Yeah,
us
strategic mistake.
are so heartbroken about how many people need to be defended right now. So I thought it would be helpful, and it has.
Oh, there's good news on that, by the way. There's very good news about that. Strategically, this is kind of a strategic secret. Very few people know this. I'm very, very glad John asked me to do this. Okay, so there's a strategic secret that I learned by listening to a whole bunch of environmentalists working in North Carolina, North and South Carolina, down in that area. These were environmentalists who would send organizers into communities that were threatened with a toxic waste dump. And these were always poor communities and usually black communities, right? So toxic waste, they would be, offered a kind of sweetheart, oh, this will be wonderful to create jobs, which is, bullshit and so on. And then they would put toxic waste dumps in the edge of their town, and then people would get sick and all the rest, right? But they wouldn't go into rich towns and do that, right? So, so this network of professional organizers would do the kind of the organizing thing that we're used to doing in social change, which is you'd find out in town X, who are the Unitarian ministers or the Quakers or the whatever, who listens to NPR or whatever. Try to find those odd people in that town and sit down with them and say, hey, you're odd. I'd like to talk with you about the threat from toxic waste. And somebody, oh yeah, I'm odd enough to be interested in that. And so so they, and then so they'd be on the periphery of the town, socially speaking, and then they would work their way, right, as organizers and house meetings and so on, and get closer and closer to the center of power in that town and win those folks over. So they would tell the waste company, no, we're not interested in doing business after all, right? So this would be ordinarily, organizers often find things take a long time. You get who's available and then you try to build in and you try to get more and more. The surprise was, and these people were just absolutely scratching their heads. This was a workshop we were doing in DC, and they were saying, what happens is we're like at the edge and we're getting in and now we got another Unitarian, and then one of these trucks is coming down the street as like a demonstration of how wonderful this is going to be or something. And the superintendent of school's wife goes out and sits down in front of it. She's not supposed to do that. She's 2 months ahead of time of our schedule. We haven't gotten her to a living room yet and had Sherry and she's like way ahead of schedule. And then next thing you know, oh my gosh, the banker's wife is out there with her. No, this is totally upsetting our community organizing timetable. So what's going on? And then we figured it out together, which is that people in the center, that is to say the leadership of any group, know they have a particular responsibility to defend that group. They have a defense job. Who defends a family? The parents are expected to defend the family, not the kids. In a school, it's the school principal and the teachers who defend the school. No, they don't send the sixth graders out to do that. Right? It's always the center that feels that responsibility for defense. Who is the commander-in-chief of the nation? The president. It's not rotated among Quakers, Unitarians, and so on. Right. So it's a job that they know they have, even though I don't think it's written down anywhere. And that's how they respond. And that's why leadership, the people in the center of the town, the leadership class, was the one responding way ahead of time, because as soon as they got it, the toxic waste was a threat, they had to move into action. And then, by the way, control the movement, because part of the thing is control. Okay, so, that's how it works. Right, so fast forward, that's what we see now, right? City council member organizes 5,000 people to come to Philadelphia Airport to defend defend. Lena didn't do that. I didn't do
In
that.
24 hours also.
In 24 hours. Right? Over and over, mayors are doing that. Right? Key politicians, leaders of civic outfits, pastors falling all over themselves, wanting to be out there, we can't, printing signs to be on signs, lawn signs and all that. We defend, we defend, we defend, we defend. Okay, so we need to know that. We need to know that. Now that doesn't mean in every town, every leadership is in touch with that. Then we can prod them. So that's all right. But it's wrong for us to think, if we're movement identified, that it's our job to do. It is not our job to do, because most of us are on the periphery of our communities. We're not in the center. We're not leading politicians or whatever. And so we can expect them to do their job, and most of them will. So what's our job? Our job as social movement people is not to defend previously won gains, but to move things forward. So the task of that movement is to figure out what are the next goals. Instead of 10,000 Syrians, 50,000 Syrians. We messed up their country as much as anybody.
Yes.
Instead of X number of Iraqis, 100,000 Iraqis. We're the ones who's messed up their country way more than anybody else. And then we launch our campaigns and we do our civil disobedience and we're all over immigration and so on and so on. Fighting for more immigrants in the United States. The United States needs more immigrants. Economically, we have a great economic argument for it. It makes total sense. We can make sense with we can make sense with my brother if we are careful about ideology, careful about feel-good stuff. Just say, look, Bob, his town is, a little town falling apart. Badly needs immigrants. He'll get it when we explain it. But it's our job to keep looking ahead, pressing society forward. That's our job, not to be on the defensive. And then, and in this case, the defense will be carried by those who understand that it's their job to defend. So that would be an application of this way of strategizing that I'm talking about. And I mean, one of the great things about strategy is it gives you a place to move, right? You don't have to feel like a lot of Quakers do. I don't know how many of you are Quakers. A lot of Quakers feel like, we're supposed to be moving all the place all the time. So on Monday night I learned about Syria, and Tuesday night I learned about Latin America, and oh my God, Wednesday night I learned about climate change, and somehow we're supposed to be taking care of the whole world, and it's driving me crazy, and I'm getting absolutely nothing done, right? I mean, most Quakers get nothing done as far as social change goes. Nothing. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and they haven't done a thing in terms of actually moving any policy or shifting any structure, but very well informed. Got to be well informed on 17 issues, but that doesn't move a thing. Being well informed about Syria does not change anything in Syria. Being well informed about racism does not change anything for any black person's life. Now, there was a time 100 years ago or 150 years ago when Quakers were understood to be practical people. We were farmers, a lot of people. They didn't ask for God's guidance about whether they should plant this year. They planted the darn stuff. Quakers were read out of meeting if they got read into bankruptcy, because it meant that they were not being practical. So that's a legacy of Quakers I'd like to see us return to. We're not about being the ideal NPR listener. We are about changing the world. And the beautiful thing about strategy is it gives us an alternative to consumption as a way of orienting ourselves to the world. We don't have to be consumers to change the world. We can be strategists to change the world. And then we can be light on our feet, we can be nimble, we can do what makes sense and still take care of ourselves. I'm 79 years old. I intend to do this at least 25 more years. Right? Because I'm into strategy. So, anyway, that's really enough. You can tell I was brought up an evangelical, so I do get into preaching an awful lot. And I beg your indulgence for all that, but I do get carried away. And if you can stand and take a copy of the book, video, I would be happy to sign it. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Sorry? Do you feel up to any more questions? We're about 5 minutes to 9, and
I don't. I'm exhausted.
So how many miles did you walk today?
45.
45 miles today?
No, that's 4 days.
4 days, 5 days. 79, come on. Hello. No more victims, huh? Okay. Are we out of cookies? Oh dear.
No.
Sorry about that.
Oh. Sure there are cookies out there.
Friends.
I came to the cookies.
I
You
hope
earned your cookies.
you earned your cookies. Thank you, friends. We'll have more time for discussion tomorrow. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired. We've had a very challenging day with lots of information, lots of food for thought. Thanks to all of you really contributing and bringing in those challenging ideas that we need to grapple with, because I buy a lot of what you have to say, but I have to think about it, as I, after all, am a Quaker. But are we satisfied that the evening is complete and that we may go home and get a good night's sleep and see us in the morning? Breakfast at 7:30, meeting for worship at 8:30, and tomorrow morning we get to hear from Ricardo. So not just those snippets of wisdom, but a more elaborated talk. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, I was kind of thinking that tomorrow, to give everyone a break, I would just say mundane things that reinforce people's preconceptions.
Okay. That would be revolutionary for you, I know.
Always important.
really out of your comfort zone. Thank you so much, friends.